Is there anyone who wishes to vote or to change their vote? Seeing none, on this vote, the yeas are 58, the nays are 42. 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn not having voted in the affirmative, the motion is not agreed to. The Majority Leader? Order, please. Please take your conversations off the floor. Order, please. Please take your conversations off the floor. Order, please. Order, please. Please take your conversations off the floor.
President, I ask unanimous consent to withdraw the cloture motion with respect to H.J. Res. 61.
No objection.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
You just sign these and I'll take them to desk. I'm sorry.
Now, Mr. President, I send a cloture motion to the desk for amendment number 2640.
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on Senate Amendment number 2640, signed by 17 senators.
I ask consent the reading of the names be dispensed with.
Without objection.
I send a cloture motion to the desk for H.J. Res. 61.
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on H.J. Res. 61, a joint resolution amending the Internal Revenue Code of 1986, and so forth, signed by 17 senators, as follows.
I ask consent the names reading be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
The issue before us is of immense consequence to our country. The American people are entitled to a real voice and to know where their elected senators stand on this important issue. Until recently, this was a principle members of both parties seemed to endorse rather overwhelmingly. In fact, not a single Democrat, not one, Mr. President, not a single Democrat voted against the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act. We all recall it passed 98-1. They told us this was an issue too important for political games. Here's what one Democratic colleague said just last week. As a caucus that was opposed to games with filibusters over the last 4 years, I would think it would be really regrettable if we didn't ultimately go to the floor and cast our votes for or against this deal. But that was last week, apparently. Democratic senators just voted to filibuster and block the American people from even having a real vote on one of the most consequential foreign policy issues of our time. It's telling that Democrats would go to such extreme lengths to prevent President Obama from even having to consider legislation on this issue. If the president's so proud of this deal, then he shouldn't be afraid. Shouldn't be afraid. We all know the amount of time the administration's been spent up here asking all these guys over here to take a bullet for the team. And of course, the team is Team Obama. They all wanted to have a say. And when it came time to having a say, they said it was more important that the president not have to veto a resolution of disapproval. More important to him than to them. This is a deal that's designed to go around Congress and the American people from the very start. We all remember the president didn't want to submit it to us at all. This is going to be an executive agreement, still an executive agreement. Didn't want us to have any say at all. Senator Corker and Senator Cardin worked together, ended up developing a proposal overwhelmingly proposed and supported to give us a chance to weigh in on this important deal. It would empower Iran to maintain thousands of centrifuges and become a recognized nuclear threshold state forever on the edge of developing a nuclear weapon. That's what's before us. That's what's before us. It would effectively subsidize Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Assad regime, by the way, which apparently is now going to include a Russian military base in Syria, by showering tens of billions of dollars on their benefactors in Tehran. It would leave Iran with an enrichment capability, just as the Iranian leadership is again calling for Israel's destruction and praying every day for our destruction. This deal is sure to have many consequences that will last well beyond this administration. And yet, as things presently stand, it would limp along with little or no buy-in or input from Congress or from the American people, who, by the way, we know overwhelmingly oppose the deal, in spite of the president's best effort to sell it to them. This shouldn't be an acceptable outcome for our friends on the other side, even those who support the deal. I predicted earlier, and I'll predict again today, we're going to have a raft of new bash Iran proposals introduced by our friends on the other side. We're going to be born again Iran bashers. So let me make it clear to all of our colleagues, we have voted, we're going to vote again, but we are voting on the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act. We're not going to be taking up bills that have fewer than enough co-sponsors to override a presidential veto. If we want to make a law, like we did with Corker-Cardin, show us enough co-sponsors to make a law. But we're not interested in using floor time for get-well efforts over on the other side to try to fool their constituents into thinking, oh, I really was serious about Iran, in spite of the fact that I voted for the deal that you hate. We've only got so much floor time here in the Senate. We're going to try to use it on serious proposals that have a chance of becoming law. Now, my assumption is the president's not going to want to revisit this issue. He got what he wanted. He's not going to want to revisit this issue. So, if we want to do anything further about this Iranian regime, bring me a bill with enough co-sponsors to override a presidential veto, and we'll take a look at it. Otherwise, the American people will give us their judgment about the appropriateness of this measure a year from November. Because this is not an ordinary issue. This is an issue with a real shelf life. This is a regime that's still going to be there a year and a half from now. And of course, we know it's still an executive agreement only. So if perchance there's a president of a different party, I would say to our Iranian observers of the debate that it'll be looked at anew based upon Iranian behavior between now and then. As others have said, the Iranian parliament apparently is going to get to weigh in. I heard the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee say that. I guess they're going to get a vote. But our friends here on the other side want to employ a procedural device, which, as the Democratic leaders pointed out, is commonly used around here. But the question is, on what kind of measure is it used? This is no ordinary measure. This is different. This is different. So we'll have another opportunity to see whether we want to move past this procedural device. The president's proud of the deal. I don't know why he'd be reluctant to veto a resolution of disapproval that's put on his desk. He's having press conferences about it. He's bragging about it. He thinks this is really great. I don't know what they're protecting him from. I'd think he'd have a veto ceremony and invite all you guys down to join him and celebrate. What are you protecting him from? We'll have a chance next week, one more chance, to allow him to say how he feels about the resolution of disapproval. We know how he feels about it already. For the life of me, I can't get why he is reluctant to veto this resolution of disapproval, in effect underscoring again what a great deal he thinks it is for America. So we'll revisit the issue next week and see if maybe any folks want to change their minds and give us a chance to remove the procedural roadblock and give the president what he's been asking for. Give him what he's been asking for. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Democratic leader.
I want to be as respectful of my friend as I need to be. But let's speak reality. We are in a Congress that is dominated by the Republicans. They control the House by a large margin. They control the Senate by a large margin. The legislation that is before this body was proposed and legislated and brought to us by Republican leadership. It's their legislation, not ours. I've didn't spend all my time in my office visiting with people today. I watched the speeches, and it was stunning, the non-reality that's facing my Republican friends. They dwelled, a number of them, on what's going on in the Middle East. Not once did anyone mention the worst foreign policy decision ever made by our great country, the invasion of Iraq. Invasion of Iraq. It has destabilized that part of the world for a long, long time to come. For what? So my friends can blame all the problems in the Middle East on the president, but they're blaming the wrong person. We can't take what we have because they want to rewrite history. History is it, and people are writing history as it is. Now, part of history that is they're trying to rewrite is history that has taken place in this body. We offered on 2 separate occasions, publicly before the American people in this body, you want a vote? We'll let you have a vote. It was both times objected to. Because in the convoluted reasoning, I guess, of my friend, he thinks that people they're watching all this have no common sense, can't understand the English language. We offered to have a vote on this on 2 separate occasions. It was objected to both times. Now, this is the inane response is, you're filibustering us. I know a lot about filibusters because we've had to file cloture more than 600 times because of filibusters by the Republicans. Never in the history of the country has there ever been anything close to that. Now, what were most of those filibusters on? On motions to proceed. On this legislation that came before this body, we said we don't need a vote on motion to proceed. Go to the bill. Go to it. We also said as part of the agreement, let the leader offer the First Amendment. And he did that. Now, 60-vote threshold. My friend talks and says, oh, wow, where in the world did this come from? Why would they ever consider 60 votes on this? Well, Mr. President, first of all, I know it's late in the day. I didn't bring the subject up. But my friend, the Republican leader, is talking about a world that doesn't exist anymore. And who created this world that doesn't exist anymore? My Republican friends. July 30th, 2011, from Senator McConnell. Now look, we know that on controversial matters in the Senate, and it has been for quite some time, required 60 votes. So I'd say again to my friend, that's me, it is pretty hard to make a credible case that denying a vote on your own proposal is anything other than a filibuster. A little while later, quote, I wish to make clear to the American people, Senate Republicans are ready to vote on a cloture on the Reid proposal in 30 minutes, an hour, as soon as we can get our colleagues over to the floor. We're ready to vote by requiring 60 votes, particularly on a matter of enormous importance. It's not at all unusual. It's the way the Senate operates, close quote. Another one, a few months later. Mr. President, I can only quote my good friend, that's me, who repeatedly has said, most recently in 2007, then the Senate has always been in need for 60 votes. This is my good friend, the majority leader, when he was leader of this majority in March of 2007. And he said it repeatedly, both when he was in the minority as leader and majority as leader, that it requires 60 votes, certainly on measures that are controversial. Well, Mr. President, there is no question the measure before this body, using the words of my friend, the Republican leader, is something that is important. On something important. And there's no question that this measure has been controversial. It is also, I'm using his words, is this legislation of enormous importance? I think so. At least that's my mind. And a little while later, so who gets to decide, my friend says? Who's wasting time around here? None of us. None of us have that authority to decide who's wasting time. By the way, you make things happen if you get 60 votes at some point, and you move matter to conclusion, and the best way to do that is to have an open amendment process. That's the way this place used to operate. And I say used to operate. That's an editorial comment. 2 or 3 months later, Madam President, reserving the right to object, what are we talking about is a perpetual debt ceiling grant, in effect, to the president. Matters of this level of controversy always require 60 votes. So I'd ask my friend, me, majority leader, if he would modify his consent request, set the threshold for the vote at 60. Finally, I'm not going to go read these forever. I'll read one more. Quote, well, as we all know, it takes 60 votes to do everything except the budget process. We anticipate having a vote to proceed to the 20-week pain-capable bill sometime before the end of the year as well. That was just the early part of August this year. So, Mr. President, my friend is in a dire strait, and I understand that. The House is in a terrible state of disarray. They don't know what they're going to do. On one hand, what they say they're going to do is the president doesn't have he can't send the papers to them, so they won't have a vote on that. The papers didn't come to them. And then they turn right around and are going to vote on a resolution of approval. I guess they don't need the papers for that. And then they're going to vote on more sanctions. And then they don't know what they're going to do. It is very unusual when the one party controls both branches of the bicameral legislature that they don't kind of work together. But obviously, there's no working together here. So I understand my friend's frustration. This is a situation where he's lost the vote. And it's a situation, Mr. President, where he is simply not in touch with reality as it exists. So I want to say to everyone within the sound of my voice, the Senate has spoken, and they've spoken with a clarion voice and declared that the historic agreement to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon will stand. That's what this agreement is all about. It's about whether or not Iran should have a nuclear weapon, and the countries that you wouldn't think would be involved in supporting something like this, but they know the importance of it themselves, and they agreed to go along with this agreement. They helped us negotiate it. China, Russia, they agreed even. The Senate has spoken with a clarion voice and declared that this historic agreement to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon will stand. So I say, my fellow Americans, and I say that with all respect for everybody that's out there listening and will read about this, our allies, our negotiating partners around the world should know that today's outcome was clear, decisive, and final. There is now no doubt whatsoever that the United States Congress will allow this historic agreement to proceed. Efforts by opponents to derail this agreement were soundly rejected by a margin much larger than anyone thought achievable even a few days ago. Any future attempts, as my friend is talking about, to relitigate this issue, as I guess we're going to be in a position like on Affordable Care Act. Going to try to repeal it 60 times? Going to try to break that record? Any future attempts to relitigate this issue in the Senate will meet the same outcome and will be nothing more than wasted time. Time we can't afford to waste with the government shutdown looming in a matter of weeks. More of the disarray of my friends, the Republicans, we're not making up closing government. The government was closed 2 years ago for almost 3 weeks. So we take those threats seriously. And I would hope that we could get around to doing something about that rather than having wasted cloture motions on something that we agreed to have a vote. Cloture is an effort to, filibusters are an effort to stop debate. We said, when I came in here Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you want more time than that to debate? Go ahead and do it. We're not in any way stopping debate, as was done by my Republican colleagues hundreds of times in years past. So this can be relitigated. Let's do it over 60 times to try to break the Affordable Care Act record if you choose. But this matter is over with. It's something of so much importance that we should move on to something else. We have so much to do in this body, so much to do. We have our highway situation that is deteriorating. We have hundreds of thousands of bridges that are in a state of disrepair, need refurbishing, and some of them being replaced. Our highway system, I met today with the Regional Transportation Authority from someone that represents 80% of the population in our state. And we're in desperate shape all over Nevada for doing something about highways. But we're not doing anything about highways. We're fiddling around on that, patching stuff. We got something done. I was happy to get that done. We have cybersecurity. As we're here talking right now in this body, we have groups, individuals, and countries that are trying to hack us. And not trying, they're doing it. We have not had the ability to get cybersecurity legislation before this body. On something we done, it was brought up as an afterthought. We have Senator Burr, Senator Feinstein. The bill that they produce is not my favorite. I think we could do better than it, but I support their legislation. We've got to do something. Let's start someplace doing something that's important for the American people. So I say to everyone here, it is time we move on to something else. This matter is over. You can continue to relitigate it, but it's going to have the same result.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
As the Democratic leader frequently reminded me when he was the majority leader always gets the last word. I enjoyed hearing the Democratic leader's history lesson going back as I recount. I'm sure I'll leave some out to the Iraq War resolution, which he voted for, as did Hillary Clinton, to a recitation of past debates from Obamacare to you name it, including complaining about highways, a bill that Senator Boxer and I worked on and actually passed that he voted against, which hopefully will soon be in conference. But none of that has anything to do with what's before us today. The issue before us today is the Iran nuclear agreement. We know how the American people feel about it. They're overwhelmingly opposed to it. We know how the Israelis feel about it. They're overwhelmingly opposed to it. We know that our Sunni Arab allies are now visiting the Russians to talk about arms purchases because they don't trust us anymore. We know the president wanted to transform the Middle East, and by golly, he has. Our friends don't trust us, and our enemies are emboldened. And so the issue's not over. The Democratic leader saying the issue's over doesn't make it over. This agreement and the foreign policy of this administration, best summed up by Jimmy Carter. A couple of months ago, he was asked to sum up the Obama administration foreign policy, and this is almost a direct quote. He said he couldn't think of a single place in the world where we were in better shape now than we were when the president came to office. Jimmy Carter. So foreign policy will be a big issue going into 2016, and this agreement is a metaphor for all the mistakes that this president has made. You name the area of the world, and you'll see the results. So no amount of saying the issue is over makes it over. It's still on the floor of the Senate. We'll have an opportunity again next week to move past this procedural snag, to give all members of the Senate an opportunity to vote up or down on a resolution of disapproval, which we know is supported on a bipartisan basis. And I'll end with this. There's bipartisan opposition to this deal. Bipartisan opposition to this deal. Only Democrat support. And so if the president's so proud of it, I can't figure out what these folks over here are protecting him from. You guys would all be invited down to the veto signing. Break out the champagne. Celebrate. Take credit for it. You own it. I yield the floor.
I recognize is going to be next, but I'm going to be fairly short here.
The Democratic leader.
I'm glad my friend brought up my vote on Iraq. I've stated on national TV, I've stated every chance I get. My biggest mistake I've ever made in my public service was voting for that bill. And I've said I learned it quickly. It was just a matter of a few short months after I voted that I realized that I had been misled in voting for that. But it doesn't matter. I voted for it, and as some say in some circles, I repented publicly for having done that. And so my feeling about the Iraq War has not changed, the mere fact that I had voted for that. I would also say this in closing. I hope the one thing that we can agree on here as Democrats and Republicans is the ability of Iran for the next 15 years, building a nuclear weapon is pretty well taken care of. But the one thing I hope we can agree on, no one has to agree with that part of my statement, is this. I would hope we would work together to make sure we continue, as indicated in the letter that Senator Kerry wrote to anybody that would, to everybody, all of us, and the Cardin legislation. I hope everyone will take a look at that, because as I said in a statement I gave on Tuesday morning, I looked at what was suggested in the Kerry letter to make Israel more safe and more secure, and some of the suggestions that Senator Cardin had in his outline. These are things I hope we can work together on. Put this to one side for the time being, but let's hope in the future we can work together to make sure the only true democracy in that part of the world is an ally of ours that will continue to do everything we can to make sure that they, I repeat, they're safe and secure.
Mr. President.
Senate Majority Leader.
There's no question the Israelis need a lot of reinforcement. No question they need to know for sure that we're on their side, because this administration has just entered into an agreement that by all objective standards could even threaten their very existence. So I think there's no question the Israelis need every reassurance we can possibly give them. I yield the floor.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.